Hey there, welcome to episode 35 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. Today is Wednesday, July 10, 2024. Recording this right around noon. Today's episode is Time on Base, which is not related to baseball, but rather my early years when I was pondering entering the United States military. So I got to spend some time on some military bases and see how things went. It's generally a good time. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to find the episode description. There are only 2 additional links beyond the usual shameless self-promotion. We'll get to that in a moment. You'll also find the show notes with a summary, which I will read to you now. I did not end up serving the United States military, though I was certainly planning to, in the Air Force most likely, and I managed in my younger years to spend some time on military bases for practical educational experiences, which I retain today. So I will share some of the basics. The link section, hopefully you can find it. We'll begin with the usual, buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. These are external websites that I use to jot down some links to the various programs, projects, other things I'm working on the Buy Me a Coffee site. And then Ko-fi.com, I did post an update recently. It's almost more of like a Twitter experience. There's some other stuff there, but look for announcements on Ko-fi.com or when websites are launched, which will be announced there. You can visit those websites, but I do use these sites to kind of provide an off-site or out-of-band, as I sometimes say, way to connect things. It's essentially the link in bio, link tree, or similar. Buy Me a Coffee enables an entire profile page with not great editing tools. It doesn't display wonderfully, but it's okay. It does the job. And you are under no obligation to spend any money at either of these sites. They're really just so that I can maintain a not so political, not so dramatic engagement point that is not Twitter or Instagram or something. And you will often find links to either or both Buy Me a Coffee or Ko-fi.com in various open source projects and other endeavors that various people pursue. So I'm in that crowd, I suppose. But again, no obligation to purchase anything or spend any money, although any monies that are spent on either of these will go indeed towards coffee, which does power all of my projects. And we have a link to the two Air Force bases that were in the central Phoenix area. One was Luke Air Force Base, which was and is, I want to say something like 40 miles west of where my parents still live to this day. And it's the Air Force Base I've been to the most, I think. And Williams Air Force Base, which was closed in 1993, which I visited one time. But we'll get into that a little bit. So I have a history link, so you can see the base history at least. It was an early training base. I think it was essentially pilot training. So you would learn how to fly. They had the T-37 Tweety Bird, various other introductions to high-speed flight. So let us begin. The Luke Day. Let's go to see Luke Day. We moved to the Glendale on the west side of Phoenix area when I was just 6 years old, turning 6. I think I was 5 and 10 months or something. And at some point, somewhere in there, we discovered that Luke Air Force Base, way down the street, had something of an open house, and we could go visit and check it out, and air shows and so on. So we did. A big open house. And it actually had quite a turnout. Now, Luke is a training base. I think it still is. They would have some pretty cool aircraft there at the time. I want to say I saw F-15, F-16. I don't remember which aircraft they were using for training there. They would eventually be the training base for F-15E, the Strike Eagle. So due to my Air Force JOTC connections, I ended up spending time with someone whose father was chief mechanic, chief maintenance, some sort of a senior master sergeant, high E rank, in charge of maintenance on the F-15E. So had a couple of stories about how cool they were from that angle. So yeah, Luke was from my perspective on the base, visiting and so on, very interesting, very very fine. A lot of Air Force bases, and in fact, military bases probably are. I just haven't been to them. And of course, there were various visiting aircraft for the Luke day. Couldn't even begin to remember the various. I'm going to guess. I want to say I saw like a Corsair 2, I suppose. This is the fighter. Probably you would have seen this during the Vietnam era. Giant air scoop in the nose, below the nose. I think I saw a Crusader there. I'm sorry, a Corsair. Crusader looks somewhat similar, but they're more Navy. So I think I saw a Corsair. I know there was a Phantom at some point because Phantoms would make an appearance at Luke now and then. I have an interesting, I'll just inject it here because the Phantom was not always around, but there was an occasion we had, and this would be later when one of my later visits to Luke, but so this is not at all during the Luke Day open house. But we had an opportunity to get on a small tour bus, a short bus, if you will, and head out on the flight line and go out to the runways and park between two runways, left and right. So we were parked there in the middle, and somewhere through our time, we were probably there about 20 minutes, I think they were F-16s, two F-16s say, it was not F-15s, I think it was F-16s, pull up, run up the engines, and then release the brakes and head down the runway to take off. And it was loud, very impressive. Then two F-4 Phantoms did the same thing on the other runway. So say the Air Force, say the F-16s were on left. So the Phantoms pull up on the right very soon after. So the lingering memory, the sound, they're still, you can still hear them flying. They're ascending. So the Phantoms pull up, and maybe they chose right so that you don't get the residual air disturbances down the runway. Who can say? So the Phantoms are over on the right. Now the Phantoms have twin engines. The F-16 has a single engine. I want to say a Pratt & Whitney F-100. I don't know what the Phantoms have, but I believe are older technologies, so they had a lot more. They got a lot more of their performance from afterburners, and I think that Pratt & Whitney F-100 has a 5-stage afterburner. I remember learning that somewhere in my travels. So the Phantom, I don't know how many stages, but they definitely dumped fuel into the exhaust to boost the power of the jet. So to take off, I'm going to assume they kicked in a couple of afterburner stages. The entire short bus and everyone in it was shaking with the low frequency rumbles of these very potent engines. So as they took off, it was very clear which one had the audio advantage. And I'm going to guess, because the F-4 Phantom, among its many missions, is sort of a precursor to the F-35. There were versions of the Phantom leaving flight decks on aircraft carriers, ground-based, etc. So I'm going to guess that the F-4, because of its, I think the mission was the Wild Weasel, if I'm digging back through memories. During the Vietnam War, I'm not going to go into detail about whether it was a war or not. That's a different thing. But during that time, the F-4, one of their missions was to fly very low and to try to find people or anti-aircraft activity, whether it was an actual anti-aircraft emplacement, like an actual weapon system, or other things going on. So they would fly very low. And I think, I'm going to guess, that part of the effect of that audio impact was to just be psychologically disturbing to people on the ground because it was indeed dramatic. So good times. There were air shows at the base. That was pretty cool. I would go multiple years to Luke Day, even when I was in AFJ ROTC, which I'll get to. And when we were in ROTC, we would go in uniform and we could help with guiding people and so on. So we got free admission to the show. And did we have to pay? I don't think we had to pay. We could get in and get some sort of thing, some benefit, like you got an extra tour of something or whatever it was. It was some upside to volunteering the time in uniform. And so that was good. But it was where I first encountered Earl and Paula Cherry, a wing walking team, and they're also audio impressive Stearman biplane. If you've never heard of Stearman doing a little low air show, it's pretty cool. Very, very cool, in fact. Big giant radial engine, walking on the wings. Good times. And then we saw the Thunderbirds, of course. That's always impressive. I did get to see the Thunderbirds with the T-38, which was the only time any of the demonstrator teams, I think it's only two, right? There's the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds. I don't know if the Marines they don't have a demonstration team, and the Army has the Golden Knights, so they jump out of airplanes. I don't know if they have a helicopter team. But either way, it was the only time that a trainer aircraft, now they could use the F-5, so I don't know why they went with the T-38, but they used the T-38, so I did get to see them flying the T-38, which is a very svelte aircraft. And then they switched over to F-16s at some point, and so I got to see those as well. I have to say the 4-ship diamond formation low show, the low altitude flyover at minimal speed, so gear down, fairly slow. And then one of the solo ships comes, I don't know how fast you can travel at sea level, pretty close to it, but definitely afterburners on, it comes right through and passes them. So that was cool. That was always fun to see this. There were skydivers. No, I don't think I did see the Golden Knights once, but I think it was just sometimes there's other shows. The United States Air Force Academy does have all of their students learn skydiving, and I think they have a demonstration team. So it might have been that at some point. So much going on. I have to say Luke Day was quite the festival. It was a good time. So that was kind of my introduction to Air Force Base activities. And of course, it was all performative. So eventually I would join the Air Force Junior ROTC program at Sunny Slope High School. I would spend all 4 years. I would eventually be the squadron commander. It was a good experience in general. During the first summer, so between my freshman and sophomore years, I had an opportunity to spend 1 week at Luke Air Force Base living on the base, part of an educational engagement program. It was myself and I want to say like 2 or 3 other fellow Sunny Slope ROTC folks. I don't recall if our instructor, Lieutenant Colonel George Heileman, retired, came out there with us. He may have on the first day. And this is, I'll contrast this with our visit to the San Diego MCRD coming up soon. So we went out there for the week, and the first day we had the quick introduction. Under no circumstances should any of you who are all minors find yourselves anywhere near, certainly not in, but anywhere near any of the residences or barracks or any other place where actual Air Force personnel are living, sleeping, etc. You are not allowed to hang out in there, which was funny to me because we were not staying in barracks. We were staying in sort of on-base housing. It was kind of like a little mini apartment complex. So I think it was like 2 or 3 story little, probably like 4 apartments to a floor or something. So little modules, right? And I remember ours was situated amongst other normal military personnel living on base. So I wasn't paying attention. I think I went to the BX or somewhere. So I was walking back and I did not go one extra sidewalk path to our module, our little building. So I entered into the wrong building. So I walked in. They didn't have the door locked. there was kind of like a common living room and bedrooms, like a home, I suppose. And so I walk in, and immediately what enters my mind is, we will all be in trouble if I find myself, the whole thing at the beginning there. I walk in, I'm like, this doesn't look right. And then someone comes out of one of the rooms. Oh, hey, how's it going? Who are you looking for? And I was like, I'm in the wrong place. So a little minor panic. Not very exciting, but not as exciting as the other warning we received, which was this. Luke Air Force Base is a live Air Force Base with real jets, real aircraft, real training, real stuff going on. Under no circumstances were we to pass. There was a very clearly marked and obviously very visible chain link fence, which stood out because there wasn't a lot around it. As you would enter the flight line, you could walk through a reasonably large open space. I think because the base was pretty much active duty personnel and all that, there weren't armed guards at this large entrance, if you will. But if someone needed to drive a vehicle onto the flight line, or if there was some other maybe emergency or something, so access to the flight line was not guarded or gated so much. The fence, the chain link fence, was clearly there to just as a kind of a line of demarcation, like don't go over there unless you really intend to. And we were told straight out, if you wander onto the flight line, you may very quickly, very soon after, find yourself tackled by several large air police. And don't do that. And so I think by day 3, someone had found themselves chasing a Frisbee or some other dumb thing. And so we did have the I told you so presentation the next morning. Nobody got shot, which was probably good. But I didn't do that one. So yeah, I just walked into the wrong apartment. Not so dramatic as having the air police tackle me. I think because I had spent the Luke Day visits multiple times, I think I was familiar with the flight line. I wasn't overly sort of intrigued by it. And plus, during the workaday time, there aren't various jets with presentations and someone sitting in the cockpit to point things out, and you're not walking through a C5 Galaxy with the nose and the tail up so you could walk through this giant warehouse. Like huge, just amazing. But during the day, during a normal workday, it's just jets taking off, landing, training activities, and so on. So I wasn't drawn to the flight line to get in trouble. But we were. So there was no performance. There was no open house. There was no fanfare, no festive atmosphere. So the week was spent living there in the classroom by day, eating in the dining hall for breakfast and lunch. Then we could, for dinner, we could go get pizza or go to some other restaurant. We could leave the base if we wanted to, although, we were advised to be careful. But, we were just high school students, so couldn't get into too much trouble. No suitable identification to get into any other adult establishments, if there even were any out there. But end of the day, it was a fun week. So we were living there. We were living there like anyone else. And I remember playing pool, some other things. I mean, at the end of the day, we were not hanging out with the military personnel by design. And if we found ourselves in an on-base entertainment venue of some sort, or something to do, we weren't really associating with them, with the active duty personnel anyway. So we were kind of keeping to ourselves. We were just high school students. This may sound silly, but it was most interesting to see just how normal the days were, despite the fact that the flight line was right over there, literally like right there. And we had jets taking off and landing all throughout the day. They were loud enough, resonance frequencies being what they are, to, every once in a while you'd get a little window shake, or you could feel the drop ceiling vibrating a little bit. So the F-15s, F-16s, they're still loud. If an F-4 was flying over, of course, different story. But, all day, jets taking off, landing, so fairly loud. Nobody complaining about jets flying over. And then also in the evenings, not as much, but not zero. And then even at night, late at night. So if you had a night training, nobody on the base is going to say, "Oh, you're making too much noise." So it was pretty normal. And I think that kind of, well, I mean, you can assume these things, but after spending a week there, you're like, oh, okay, this is like normal life. People get in their work clothes are either some sort of Class C uniform, short sleeve, blue outfit, or maybe they're wearing a BDU style for working in maintenance or on the flight line, or maybe they have their AP Air Police uniform, and those are the only people on base that are actually armed. You're not allowed to actually have firearms on base, on your person, or in your possession, which was also interesting. I had never really thought about that, but not that we were armed. But yeah, not everybody's walking around with weapons. So it was an interesting week. It was it was informative and very educational. And during the week, I have to be honest, it was not that much a departure from our normal in classroom during the school year time at school. So it was interesting. It was noteworthy. Life changing, maybe. I don't know. I spent a week at the San Diego MCRD. So during my sophomore year, I was yet more involved. As I suggested, I would eventually be the squadron commander. So I was pretty involved in the Air Force JROTC program at Sunny Slope. And so I want to say, was it Deer Valley? There was another high school, and they had a naval JROTC program. And somehow we had an opportunity. I think there was an exchange program. So like I participated. So I think it was myself and Brad Deming, if I'm remembering correctly. And I think it was just the two of us. And so it might have been just two of us at Luke. Maybe not 3 or 4. Maybe it was 2. Anyway, so we had an exchange. So two of the Navy folks would spend a week at the Air Force Base. And we would spend a week at the San Diego Marine Corps Recruit Depot. So that was fun. We got in some vans, 2 vans. I ended up somehow way in the back of the van. So like tons of luggage, basically big giant rucksack style equipment and whatnot. The Navy guys were packing for real. I probably had like a backpack and my uniform and stuff. And I think we had to wear Navy uniforms. So I remember going to visit the high school, and the student commander, his name was Marshall something, and the instructors who would visit the base with us, they stayed there because they drove the vans. So I went there, and I remember being fitted for a uniform. So I think we had to wear Navy beige. I don't know how the uniforms are described, but beige daily, pretty normal. So we had our Navy outfits to wear, and then uniform to wear, and then we packed up, hit the road on the vans. The trip was fine. If you've ever driven from Phoenix to San Diego, it's something like 4 hours, maybe. We spent the week. If you have ever seen Full Metal Jacket, it was not too dissimilar in the barracks part of the movie at the beginning, the first part of the movie. Though only a fractional sample. We didn't experience the full range of experiences that you might when you are actually a recruit. We began by needing to set up our barracks. So if you do remember the movie, it was very similar. Barracks, mattresses, everything else were at one end of this very large room, and we had to kind of assemble our stuff, figure out who was going to sleep where, and so on. Stow your gear in a little. It wasn't quite a foot locker, more of a wardrobe, a tactical wardrobe, so you could hang your uniform. But we did have to assemble this, and it was very similar to the movie, except for the red floor. We did not have the very prominent red floors as you see in the movie. It was more of a kind of a brownish. We had to have an assigned guard duty overnight, so someone always had to be awake on the deck. We could hear very clearly the day beginning outside on the parade pad before sunrise. So people would assemble as the sun was coming up and begin their day of various types of training, probably going for a morning run, sometimes on the confidence course. Who knows? We did not experience that. I think one morning we woke up early and ran around the parade pad, but not like on any trails. And a lot of this was almost certainly because we were not actually in the military, and so liability was almost certainly the beginning of the reasons why we would not be jumping on the confidence course or going out to the firing range or anything like this. So we were required to take part in some fairly minimal PT, though. So like I said, so pretty basic. We only got to observe. So I've referred to the confidence course a couple of times. We watched. We got a basic overview. So we kind of got the normal civilian tour. We visited a couple of the different training areas, including this one. We saw what was going on, how it worked. We got the explainer. We got the rundown on the, what is it called? The casual company for people who are injured during basic training. We had a real drill sergeant with the raspy voice describing some of the activities. We participated in various activities. We got a nice visit to the SEAL training facility, the Sea, Air, and Land Navy Special Forces. I don't want to misuse that term, but you've seen the movie Navy SEALs. So very cool. They went through their training, how that worked. Once again, we did not fire any weapons. We did visit one of their weapon shacks or huts, like where they keep their weapons, the armory, I suppose. They went through a selection of the standard weapons that they were using during training and how they did this training and so on. So yeah, during the week, again, a lot of interesting stuff. Although I found the week at Luke was more classroom time and learning about how an Air Force base works, how the training worked. So it was a little bit more academic. The visit to the MCRD and the SEAL training facility, less. It was a lot more moving parts to witness. I will say this. So part of the training was to take part in this. So they kind of went through like how a war college program works, and the officer, was it warfare training school? Surface Officer Warfare Training School, I think it was. Surface Warfare Officers Training? Surface Warfare Officer School. SWAS? That sounds right. Surface Warfare Officer School. So you kind of learned, so that was another visit to the Navy base. You learned how to plot a solution for firing weapons, how to find submarine, all the basics that you could fit into a day. So that was the most interesting. And then we did a ride out beyond the international, what is it called? When you're 12 miles out into international waters. What is that called? I can't remember. So we got on a YP, a yard patrol boat. So kind of like a PT boat, if you're familiar with McHale's Navy or John F. Kennedy's naval career. Yard patrol boat, not really a fighting ship, intended to be around the docks, kind of like the military police driving around in jeeps on the ground. So here you're cruising around on the water, really just keeping an eye on things. So we got on the YP. We headed out beyond the whatever that, I cannot remember that thing, the line, whatever. I think it's 12 miles, but it's we went out into international waters. We received some sort of I think we got a ribbon. I think there was a ribbon we were able to wear on our uniforms. Something about having been in international waters, for what that's worth. But perhaps more interesting, they handed over the con to the student group, and we conducted overboard drills. So someone would throw a life preserver ring out onto the water, and we would cruise around, and then it was kind of at random. Like you would either start immediately or you would give it a minute so that there was some distance. You'd have to try to find the ring. So it was basic, yet you don't always think of these things if you're a normal person. But, you immediately do this. You start looking. When you make a sighting, you yell this, and then you point and you maintain visual contact with pointing so that other people can see where you're pointing. It's also it's a pro action so that you are actually maintaining contact. You are making a physical gesture and you are keeping an eye. So other people could triangulate on where you're pointing and try to get another view and so on. So various man overboard or overboard drills, and that was fun. That was really interesting. So that was probably the high point of the day. Of the week was that day spent. I think it was SWAS. I think it was Surface Warfare Officer School. Only one day, not quite ready to enter a hot region anywhere on the planet. And well, I guess we could find people if they jumped overboard. Kind of interesting. So when you think about it, the idea that you learn firsthand is that even though that ring is white, I think it was white with red markings, it's very easy to lose it in the water, right? You don't, it's not immediately apparent. So you'd sometimes have to look, and if the water is choppy at all, it could be hiding behind a little wave, right? So it could be rolling on the waves, and you lose sight of it for a second. You're like, oh, there it is. You have to wonder, because I mean, obviously, pontoon boats and other vehicles that are used by pirates, literally pirates who wish to attack, possibly board even naval ships. They're not. I mean, they're bigger than the ring, obviously, but it is the sea is vast, and if the waters are moving, if there are waves moving across the surface of the water, things are moving and bobbing up and down and so on. And if you're blending in with the water, if you're camouflaged for surface assault, I have some sense. How come they didn't just see them on radar? How come? Well, these are very small groups of people with some weapons and some gumption, and that's how that works. So very interesting, enlightening to see just how much of a challenge it can be to find one person, and it wasn't a person, it was just the ring, but to find that in a vast body of water, especially you're on the surface of the water in a helicopter or something, you could maybe see a little bit better, but your scanning area becomes huge with altitude. So interesting. It was yet more educational experience. And we did, this is a little audible, we did visit the Horton Plaza, which has long since closed, sold or something. Possibly one of the coolest malls I've ever been to. Very interesting layout. It's almost like if you've never been to the Winchester Mansion, not quite as silly with some of the architectural choices. That's what happens when ghosts are trying to cause you trouble. But equally interesting as far as, walkways and just the general design of the mall. It was open air, sort of an open air in the middle with walkways cutting across. And it had an interesting character. So probably one of the coolest malls I've had an opportunity to visit. So we did take an evening and we took the vans and headed out to the mall. It was a good time. I'm glad I got to experience that, among other things. So it was a good week. Made some interesting connections with our Navy colleagues, and glad I did it. So during my time in ROTC, like I said, I was there for all 4 years. We had opportunities to visit Luke and Williams Air Force Base. Now, Williams, as I mentioned, was a base where you would start your pilot training. They had the T-37 Tweety Bird, which is a jet. I don't know if they still use it. Probably not. Maybe. It actually had a fairly, familiar to the casual observer, a really thick wing, not a supercritical wing by any means. So this is a jet aircraft intended to remain well below the speed of sound. Kind of like a big Cessna, really, low-wing Cessna. The seating was side by side, so the instructor could take the controls very easily, could point out things, observe your behaviors, and so on. So we visited the base, and we got to see the T-37. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. One of our NCO instructors for, I think it was my third year, the first 2 years was Sergeant Macmillan. Sergeant Mac did some time on Air Force One. He was an intensely opinionated person. And intensely opinionated, very old. And so he had plenty of stories. He and his friend, whose name escapes me, had taken us up so I went up once with the friend who was not, he may have been retired military, but he was not an instructor of any kind. He just had some airplanes. So we went up in a T-34, and this was the predecessor to the T-37 as far as training for military. The Air Force used some variant. I think it was a Beechcraft. I think I've talked about this previously. So we went up in a T-34, and this was, I was in the back seat. It would have been cooler in the front seat. Joysticks, a little bit closer to, a movie-like experience. And we actually did some aerobatic flying and so on. So that was a good time. So Sergeant Mac was much more hands-on pilot, very opinionated, very old man. So Sergeant Mac, he would retire, moved to Prescott, and many years later, moved on from the mortal coil. So somewhere in there, we got Sergeant Larry's, and I think it was the third year, if I'm remembering correctly. Sergeant Larry's had, it's not an E3. It's he was I don't know. He was in the military for many years. So he was a trainer at Williams Air Force Base in the hypobaric chamber. So you'd simulate being at high altitudes. This led to the really interesting tour. So we got to see the T-37, but we did spend some time learning about those early days of pilot training, including spending time in the hypobaric chamber to simulate high altitude equipment failures. We were not allowed to participate, just like that confidence course at the MCRD, just like going on the flight line. We are not in the military. We are not to put ourselves in danger of injury, liability being what it is for high school students on a military base. So we didn't get to try the hypobaric chamber, but we certainly got the stories and the rundown. We got to go into the chamber just at normal temperature and pressure. We did get to see, they had, for example, a collection of pegs, square pegs, round holes, something like this. And I think we watched training videos later, but they described it in the chamber. They said, everybody can do that. But when you drop the pressure in the hypobaric chamber so that you are simulating, 30,000 feet, and they tell you to take off your oxygen equipment and try to complete the puzzle, put the pegs in the holes. They said in about 20 seconds, your useful consciousness trails off severely, and you will have people having huge difficulty putting the pegs in the holes. Try to write your name. So they had a bunch of accessories to demonstrate to people. And the take home was this: you must understand when your useful consciousness is being compromised. You don't always take off your oxygen equipment. By the way, whenever you see in a movie where the like Top Gun or something, they rip the mask off, like like they got to get a better breath. Like there's real air coming from that mask so that you can breathe. Taking it off, not advisable. Anyway, so for the training, you would take off your mask. But the important thing to realize is that there would be occasions where the equipment would fail, a leak, a seal, maybe a crack in a tube, hose, anything that would lead to a reduction in you would basically enter a hypoxia situation. Possible, although less likely, contaminated airflow. So if there was something entering your oxygen or air system, it's not pure oxygen, but if something is entering your air system and you suddenly found yourself suffering histotoxic hypoxia, that's where you are breathing in poison or something dangerous. This could be carbon monoxide. If somehow some exhaust product finds its way into your air supply, carbon monoxide does not dissociate, so you would begin to suffer histotoxic hypoxia. This is, which would be very similar to hypoxic hypoxia, not enough air, but in this case, air is being prevented from being carried on your hemoglobin. Carbon monoxide sticks to your red blood cells and does not let go, and that can be a problem. So the whole goal was to recognize this and to be able to take appropriate action, move to a lower altitude, etc. So something where you could try to recover. Totally fascinating. We also, and I've told this story a few other times, not during a podcast. What would happen is you could find yourself flying and through a series of maneuvers be experiencing what's called spatial disorientation. We sometimes call this being dizzy, but spatial disorientation is very interesting from a pilot standpoint because you could literally make fatal navigation flight decisions based on spatial disorientation. Now, the training or the demonstration was very interesting. They had this chair, not quite an office chair, but a spinning chair. It could rotate along a vertical or around a vertical axis. You'd sit in the chair, and the chair was surrounded by a grab bar, like a ring, around the chair, and it was extremely smooth rotation. So paid extra for the military grade bearings, and you could essentially rotate the chair noiselessly, very little, almost no friction. So you're not hearing any noise, you're not feeling any jerk, that third derivative, nearly zero. So you could very smoothly change the rotational velocity and acceleration. So you'd have someone sit in the chair, and you could rotate the chair while their eyes are closed, right? So you're rotating the chair, and when you slow the chair down, they would kind of feel it, and you could have them try to indicate, when you change directions very slowly, you come to a slow stop, then you move in the other direction. You could kind of tell, like, okay, that's very interesting. Now, what was really crazy, they would have someone, and I think we all did this. I think we all got to try it. Lean your head down onto that railing, that the ring around the chair. Lean your head down, like put your temple, pick a side of your head, lay it down on the chair. So your head is in an unusual orientation with regard to the rotation. Now they did the same thing. So they said, put your thumbs on, put your fists on the rail, the ring around the chair. So your head is resting on. You basically put your hands in fist form on either side of your head on this ring, and point your thumbs up. And I said, turn your wrists so that your thumbs are pointed in the direction of rotation. Okay. So they start rotating you, and you eventually feel, oh, okay, we are moving. I mean, it wasn't that good. You could feel that you were moving, but you're like, okay, I can feel that we're moving in this direction. So you're clockwise, say. So you're pointing your thumbs to your right. Your head is down on the side. Side of your head is resting on the bar. You're moving along, maybe 15 RPM or something, very slowly, very comfortable. And then the person begins to slow down the rotation, very, very comfortably, very smoothly, reducing the rotation to zero. Now you are not turning at all. And just as the rotation comes to zero, almost directly, like magically, the person's thumbs point, they swing up, they're pointing up, and then they swing down to the other direction. Now they feel they are spinning in counterclockwise rotation. They're not moving. So the take-home lesson is, if you are not familiar with how spatial disorientation can affect your perceptions, and if you find yourself in the possibly fatal circumstance of not understanding what your instruments are telling you, and you trust instead your inner ear, the seat of your pants, as they say, if you don't believe the horizon, which may be only slightly angled, but if you don't trust your instruments, which are telling you the truth, right? Like, oh, you are banking. You're at a 10-degree bank. If you don't feel it, or if you think you're going the other direction, then you will enter what is called a death spiral. And if you look up JFK Jr., who was not a instrument-rated pilot, flying in inclement or low visibility weather, he was flying he was flying such that he was in a shallow bank, which causes a very slow, smooth rotation, inner ear, just like being in that chair with your head tilted, right? Because you're moving around, you're not sitting head forward. So you're moving your head around, your inner ear is experiencing this slow but definitely apparent collection of forces on it. So it begins to feel that you are moving, that you're rotating, that you're tilted. What would you do? You correct that. So now you apply the opposite rotation. You bank in the other direction that you feel. And then you are now, your inner ear is going, oh, wait, now we're going the other direction. And you begin to confuse your senses because of these slow rotational movements. Your head orientation is changing. So now you think you have corrected, but you feel like you're tilted more because your inner ear is now kind of out of sync with real motion. There's a lag. So then you correct back in the other direction just so that you feel that you're flying vertically, but you end up now correcting back to the original bank. And this can go on for some amount of time. But when you are now a slow bank or a shallow bank like this, you will lose altitude. And if you are finding yourself lost, you're not able to, low visibility, you're not able to orient yourself. You're not reading your compass. You're not reading your artificial horizon. You're not reading your bank indicator, your altimeter. You're losing altitude throughout this entire exercise. And eventually you make a very hard landing on the water. The last one. And so an interesting turn of events in that case. And this was the basis of that. Now, this was before. So this was just a general discussion about death spirals and how your inner ear can be your worst enemy and so on. Totally educational. Very interesting. So this was 87, 88 sometime. 88 probably. So it was good to have Sergeant Larry's basically led the tour. I think he had just separated. I don't know if he'd retired. He had just separated from the Air Force the year or two before. So still had his colleagues working there. Got the whole rundown. We got to see the ejection seat trainer. And the take home there was you don't want to you don't want to eject. I was going to say educate. You don't want to eject from an aircraft. It's not a good experience. It's better than dying, but it is a tremendous load on your body. I think it's back at the time it was 22 Gs with a 0-0, so 0 altitude, 0 velocity ejection seat. I want to say that there were possibilities of being able to eject through a protective barrier, that if your aircraft was in a hangar, like a field hangar, not in like a reinforced steel structure, but like, sheet metal, that it was somehow able not to safely punch through that or anything, but that maybe, there was a chance you could get through that, but, everything I've heard about the Top Gun with Goose hitting the canopy, that was actually a possibility. There was supposed to be head or face protection as part of an ejection seat. That may have been during the Vietnam era. So you'd pull those two big rings, and that would pull almost like a welder's mask over your face. And I thought that was to try to pierce the canopy, but that's outside of this episode. Take home. Yeah, you don't want to eject. You can have your limbs sheared off. So they would train you to be, pull all your limbs in, your legs, your everything. It's got to be tight. And you had to have your head, and there was a sensor, like a little contact sensor. You had to have your head back. And this trainer did not do 22 Gs. I think it was something like 7 Gs. So it would launch you on this rail and stop you. So you'd be probably 50 feet up in the air. The 30, 50, somewhere in there. If you had your head in a helmet, so now your head is even heavier. If you did not have your head back on the as far as it could go during the ejection seat firing, your head would then be, thanks to gravity, would be pulled down and possibly even ripped off of your body because you have this extra mass and your neck is just not that strong. We learned somewhere along the way, I think it was at Williams, we learned about the ideal physiology for a pilot who would be experiencing supersonic flight. And it turns out I was closer to the ideal body frame and so on for a pilot than your tall. So Tom Cruise does have that. Heart to brain distance, shorter is better. At the time, you were not allowed to do any sort of distance training because your heart rate, your beats per minute, in the case where you're pulling a 9G, limited to 9G turn or other maneuver, your heart rate, because you have to perform your L1, I think it is. Yeah, the L1 maneuver. That's where you tense up your entire body. Your G equipment is tightening around your legs to prevent blood from flowing into your legs. So it's trying to push it up into your brain. And your heart rate can go up into the hundreds of beats per minute, 3, 4, 5, for moments. So you don't want to keep it there for very long. So you get out of your turn, your heart rate begins to go back to normal. If you're a distance runner, if you're running marathons, your heart rate is not going to keep up with this very short-term sort of impulse of huge delta. Is that the right way of not an impulse, but what do you call a Dirac delta function? Like we need to quadruple the heart rate for 10 beats and then go back to normal. So if your heart is very well trained at distance running and other, cardiac training, your heart is simply not going to respond and you'll pass out. Your heart rate has to be able to drop down from 400 down to something reasonable. So if your heart is not used to these huge transitions, thanks to distance training. So at the time when I was considering joining the Air Force, and I was never going to run into this, but I think it was a 3-mile limit 3 times a week was the guideline. So you can exercise, but do not become a distance runner and find yourself passing out during combat maneuvers. We had our monthly Air Force Now videos, which were always very educational, somewhat topical, though they were not current. They were months old, but they were still reasonably current. Some interesting insights into Air Force Now, just like the title. I don't know if they still produce this content, but we got to see a lot of interesting things, including apropos, a camera pointed at someone in a centrifuge training device going up to 9Gs, and they would show the heart rate going up and down and changing and people passing out because they didn't do their L1 correctly and so on. We had, we lived a fraction of a fractional paramilitary life. We had uniform days once a week, I think it was on Monday, and, inspections and drill and ceremonies, and you had to have your hair cut according to military, what was it? The personal grooming standard, which was 3510 at the time. So yeah, it was kind of an all-in thing. Those of us who really took it seriously, excelled. We obtained officer rankings and positions of leadership, or just more educational. So the entire process of JROTC, very educational. We had our liaison officer, Captain Byers, who by the time I was graduating and was receiving my Type 1 scholarship, spoiler alert. It was Major Byers gave me my Type 1 scholarship award during graduation, somewhere in there. So drill team competitions, color guard presentations. So, there were ways for people who were interested to participate fairly proactively in these paramilitary activities. Very, very educational. I did have an opportunity to participate in the United States Air Force Academy Summer Scientific Seminar. This is perhaps the most noteworthy, probably the basis for my almost definitely the basis for my original decision to not pursue the Air Force Academy, which had always been like a goal, kind of a lofty goal, kind of like, it'd be cool to attend the United States Air Force Academy. And during the ROTC program, you hear some things, you learn some things, Air Force Now, some of the history, some of the background of the program. It's not West Point, it's not Annapolis, it's certainly not the MCRD for the Marines, it's not SWAS, it's the Air Force Academy. So, okay, interested in getting an appointment, pursuing an appointment. So that was part of my personal agenda, was to learn what I learned through my high school career in junior ROTC. Part of the application process, if you wanted to pursue an appointment at the academy, you'd fill out all the paperwork, and you had to, I think it was compulsory as part of the application process. You could probably not, but I don't know that that was a good idea. Anyway, so I attended the summer scientific seminar, which was essentially come and spend a week at the academy during the summer, see what you think. So we did the same thing. So the academy is essentially a military base as well. So I spent another week on another military installation. Very impressive facility, very visually picturesque. The spires at the Academy Cathedral, or I can't remember what it's called. Very attractive campus. It was during the summer, so we didn't get the Colorado Springs winter effect, but the weather was very nice. The air was crisp. We learned about their training program. I believe everyone would become certified in skydiving, if I recall, and then those who were interested could also get a pilot's license. So if you were pursuing flight training, you would move on from having your basic sort of a general aviation style license, right? They probably did instrument ratings, but nothing too outlandish. I don't know what they do today. This was back in the summer of '88. The experience was great. Great and insight, and brought some insight to me. The most interesting thing that I recall, I mean, we got tours of the facility. We got to see tours of the facility. We got to see, some of the hands-on, if you're at the academy, you get some of the stuff that they don't hand out to the ROTC units, right? Because this is an actual military base. So you're getting some access to things to play with, right? If you have a scientific mind, hey, summer scientific seminar. The most interesting thing to me that we got to do was using. At the time, it was not even cutting edge at the time, but it was by today's standards laughable. It was probably some IBM PC devices. I remember the clicky keyboard, so they at least had good choice in the buckling spring keyboard selection. But we had color CRTs and we were designing airfoils, and it was the most basic, VGA graphics probably. If anyone old school out there, I mean, at the time it was like, hey, this is cool. By today's standards, it would be classic computing. Not making fun of it, just saying that today there would be a completely different experience. Basic airfoil design, basic stable aircraft design. So from my thinking, my interest in airplanes, which I've talked about previously, totally fascinating, right? Length of fuselage, wing angle with it. So basically a stable aircraft that will fly itself, resistant to stalling. Well, first of all, if you want to resist stalling, you canard, so tail in the front, horizontal stabilizer in the front of the aircraft. So therefore you're not applying torque, because the large airfoil, the main wings, will tend to put a downward yaw moment on the fuselage. So you need to have the stabilizer, the horizontal stabilizer in the rear of the aircraft actually needs to push down. When you're trimmed for stable flight, you need to have the rear horizontal stabilizer pushing down on the back of the plane, so it's not contributing to lift of the aircraft. It's almost like the what do you call it? The rear rotor on a helicopter is basically preventing the aircraft from spinning around the rotor hub, right? So the torque of the rotor wants to turn the entire helicopter fuselage in the other direction. So you need to have the tail rotor pointing to cancel that out. So similarly, in a traditional, what everybody sees today, aircraft, the horizontal stabilizer on the rear of the aircraft is applying a downward force on the fuselage to counter the torque around the center of rotation brought on by the much larger main wings. That's just the nature of how airfoils work. If, however, you move the horizontal stabilizer to the front part of the aircraft, now, because the same yaw moment is occurring, the main airfoil is going to try to push the nose down. You you put the canard horizontal stabilizers in the front of the aircraft, they are now pushing up. So now both the main wings and the horizontal stabilizer are applying upward force on the fuselage, so you get a little bit more lift. I've read recently that there are some interesting things about canards. The canards are usually supposed to be a little bit more stall resistant, but that's not always the case. You can look at a Klein-Fogelman airfoil, which is supposed to be even more stall resistant. I think you can find a book called The Ultimate Paper Airplane, where you can make a Klein-Fogelman airfoil out of paper. Klein-Fogelman puts a sort of a detent in the wing section, and I think I actually tried to do this with mine. Didn't work. But interesting stuff, right? Fluid dynamics, aerodynamics. It was always an interesting thing to me. That's why I wanted to do all this. So we use this airfoil design tool and the knowledge that we received from our very quick overview about stable. A stable aircraft will have the main wing section and the horizontal stabilizers in a V, right? So the wing tips will be higher than the fuselage. So the more steep the V, the less lift you have, because you're bleeding air off it to the wingtips. But anytime the aircraft turns to the left, turns to the right, the opposite wing will lose lift faster, and so the plane will tend to return to horizontal flight. A long fuselage makes it easier to apply torque to the airframe by the control surfaces, so you'll end up with a more stable aircraft. And there were a few other considerations, but long fuselage, V-shaped wings, kind of rules of thumb. So if you look at the Wright Flyer from back in 1903, was it? They specifically designed the aircraft to be unstable, thinking that would make it easier to maneuver, which was true, but it's a lot more work. And you can look up the X-29, I think it was, which was a forward swept wing, forward swept supercritical wings, designed the aircraft, or made the aircraft super duper unstable. So it had to have multiple flight control systems automatically countering the instabilities to net the pilot with some sort of controllable flight. Interesting stuff. So these were all very interesting things. The take home, though, from this part of our lesson plan for the week, we had to use the tools and our newfound knowledge about stable aircraft design to model an airfoil, then somehow realize that airfoil with balsa wood and sandpaper. So here I was trying my Klein-Fogelman, like, oh, okay, so you can put the Klein-Fogelman notch at the top of the airfoil, or my approach, you can put it at the bottom as well. So you basically have this little cutout, and that's supposed to create a little turbulent flow at the bottom of the wing, which is supposed to help with a lift when the wing is near stall, right? That is a bad description. You can read all about Klein-Fogelman. I'll find a link and I'll put it in the links for this episode, just so you can track that down. Klein-Fogelman airfoils. So my attempts did not go well. I was shooting for the stars, much like Daedalus, and aiming for the sun, I suppose. My wax wings didn't cut it. And what was it? What was the other character in that story? It was I'll put a link to that too, because now I can't remember. I got to look it up. Daedalus and the other one, because there's a ribbon that they award JROTC students for some sort of academic achievement, I think. And it's father and son, right? And Daedalus wants to fly to the sun, and he makes wings out of wax, but they melt, and he falls to the earth. But I'm totally forgetting the dad's name. Anyway, so my aircraft, we went to the enclosed football stadium there on the academy campus. We attempted to fly our balsa wood gliders that we had just constructed, and it was flight time and or distance, probably an award for each. And I was not quite at the top of either of those lists, but hey, it was still educational. It was ultimately a profoundly valuable experience. I was not sure at the end of it whether I would be quite so interested in military education. You're submerging yourself, especially the first year. After your first year, I don't remember what they called it at the Air Force Academy, but it's the plebe, or you're basically you're following straight lines, so you can't cut across the parade pad. You have to follow they had a different concrete blocks. So there was like a grid. So you'd have to follow the lines. You had to eat the square meals, all this stuff. Like, okay, for a year, but then do I really am I more interested in pursuing the engineering side? Now this would be clinched when I went for my physical, which I'll get to in a second. So I was going through the committee process. John McCain was in his first term as senator. So I was going for an appointment from him. He was a naval aviator, as you may recall, and he was really interested in sending me to Annapolis, which is on the East Coast in Maryland, in fact, in Annapolis. So the Naval Academy would have been interesting to me, but for the fact that I was not totally interested in going back to the East Coast, having grown up to the age of nearly 6 in cold winters and so on. So yeah, I'm kind of wimpy, but would I have taken it if I was interested in pursuing naval aviation? Probably. However, the decision was really made for me when I went for my Air Force physical for the appointment process. So you had to take a physical, and it was an all-day thing. I went out to Luke Air Force Base. I have a funny story. So you go out to Luke, you're there all day. You get there first thing in the morning, you're there until like 4 in the afternoon. They do the full bonus round dilation, so they tell you ahead of time that you're not supposed to drive home right away. So I basically hung out for another hour or two to let my eyes settle slightly, and then they give you a little eye protection in addition. But full dilation, and this was the bummer. So the not funny part, did the full dilation. They do a fairly substantial, not something you find if you go to a mall eyeglass shop, they're at one end of the spectrum, like the minimal. This is like there are things rotating around your head and measuring things and so on. So quite a rigmarole. And I will never forget, because again, I wanted to be a pilot. I was all bent on Air Force, flying jets, and I had loved airplanes forever and so on. Still do. Airplanes are great. The probably ophthalmologist said exactly this: I'm going to write down 20/20 vision, uncorrected, on this form. This is almost certainly the last time that will ever happen. So you have an astigmatism. Your eyesight will not be 20/20, certainly by the end of your time. If you do go to the academy, it may not even be 20/20 by the time you start. So he was reasonably kind, but the honesty was actually more important, because I said, well, if I'm not going to be able to be a pilot, do I want to pursue, because let's face it, the entire basis of our volunteer military force is that you want to be there. So it wasn't like disdain, or it wasn't like contempt for it. It was like, do I want to do this when it wouldn't be in pursuit of the reason I wanted to do it? So that was really, out of all this, probably the most useful 20 seconds. The funny part, though, during earlier in the day, probably early in the morning, we're all in the waiting room. There's probably like 15 people. We're all here for the same thing. So you go into a room, and first thing they do is they draw like 3 or 4 vials of blood. And where was Theranos when we needed him? Theranos? So not him. I mean the Edison Pico blood sample thing. But anyway, hopefully that landed somewhere. So I go in the room. I've never been good about 2 things. I've gotten better at one of them. I've been asked over the years, hey, how come you're so much into science and whatnot? How come you didn't pursue, like, especially when I was in biology, and I did such a job on our fetal pig vivisection. So why aren't you becoming a doctor? Well, geez, I really have a thing. A fetal pig, frog, they're dead, right? But cutting into living things, I don't even like to see my own blood, much less the blood of others, etc. So I was always blood shy, and now over the years I've become more accustomed. I can do the serum keto and blood glucose, serum glucose measurement test. So you poke your finger, you draw some blood, and so on. So that has become a piece of cake. But the idea of cutting into others was still bothersome to me. So, but anyway, I'm here. I'm going to have 3 vials of blood drawn. It's not like a pint, but it's more than I was looking forward to. So I kind of got a little dizzy. The sight of the blood. So it wasn't enough blood to cause dizziness. So I went out into the waiting room and I felt a little woozy, right? So the person who was drawing the blood said, I'll go get you some water. So they come out. Well, in this scenario, the cups that they had to put water in looked very much like, in fact, they were sample cups. So the person comes out to me with a cup of water. Now, if it's an empty cup, you're supposed to put something in it. This person comes out with the cup on a tray and says, here you go. And I take the water. Now, everybody in the room is seeing this. So I take the cup and I'm about to drink, and they all at the same time go, what are you doing? Good times. End of the day, like I said, I was fine. I was fit enough to attend the academy, but I would not be a pilot. And this is at a time when you could not get any correction, so no keratotomy surgeries, nothing. Those rules have relaxed a little bit. But for the most part, it was basically off the table on that day. It became profoundly unlikely. And as I already mentioned, the captain and then eventually Major Byers handed me my Type 1 scholarship for an Air Force ROTC education sponsored by our federal government. And even that would change a bit as I headed off to Harvey Mudd College to experience that. And that I think I've already talked about in a previous episode, but if I haven't really gone into some of the details, I will in a different episode. But those were some formative experiences, very educational. Military bases are pretty interesting. They are not Disneyland, so they're not there for my entertainment, but it was very educational in different ways and different scenarios, different bases, different programs, different goals. We didn't do anything in the Air Force Base in my time, the week at Luke Air Force Base. We didn't do anything like the Surface Warfare Officer School and going out and doing overboard drills. So that was more hands-on. But I did have an opportunity to fly. There were 4 of our ROTC students who went up in the T-34, and I did get a second ride. So I went with both Sergeant Mack and his friend, his name escapes me, who was the owner of the aircraft. So I got 2 T-34 flights. So that was good times. The overall experience, though, highly valuable. I think you don't understand the military if you haven't been in it, so I'm not even making any such claims whatsoever. But it is an interesting experience to see from on base for more than a quick tour. So if you ever have an opportunity, I don't know if you would, to spend a week on a military base, to see a life on a military base. It's not like it is on TV, because often it's day-to-day work done by professional people doing professional things, and then at the end of their workday, they have other lives. They're often underpaid. Interesting experience. Everybody should be able to have such insight, and ask around. Anyway, so thank you for listening. Today's episode is coming to an end. Coagulating sand. I don't know if I've mentioned this lately. Coagulating sand, what you would call pins and needles, a word I came up with when I was very young. Don't forget to check out buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo for out-of-band updates. I did update both of these, as I said. There may be the return of a fifth show. My mouth is getting dry. A 5th show that has been on hiatus. The Spotify for podcasters was set up. By the way, Spotify, when they acquired Anchor and some of the other stuff they're doing, kind of chaotic, like a weird process of moving logins around and stuff. So not as well thought out as it could have been, but it could have been more. Anyway, so I got our other program of old. So you can visit buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, and you can see a minor update. We'll see where that goes. In the meantime, again, thank you for listening, and that's all I have to say about that.